We're now going to explore customer relationships, and our next speaker is the founder of SW Projects, advising brands, publishers, and influencers how to grow obsessive audiences across digital channels. Previously, she ran lifestyle partnerships at Facebook and Instagram, was an editor at the Huffington Post, and wrote several leading publications. She also created the digital Campfire download, an interview series featuring top online community builders. Let's give a big CMX Summit welcome to Sara Wilson.
Hello, everybody. Ooh, I get a track. That's amazing. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can everybody see? Is this, yeah, I can't see you, so I'm going to have to assume that you can see me and you can see my screen and everything is working. I am amazing. Oh, good. I can hear you. Wonderful. Well, I'm so thrilled to be here. As the wonderful introer said, I'm going to be talking today about this concept of digital campfires as kind of a new framework for building customer relationships and thinking about customer relationships, the active word being relationships. We're going to get into that a lot, and I'm really excited to be here. Obviously, it's a great lineup at CMX, so I'm thrilled to be among everyone. So what are we going to cover today? What do I want you to walk away with? Well, we're going to start with kind of a overview of digital campfires, what they are, why they matter, what's in it for you as a brand to create one, to partner with one, and what's in it for your customers. Partnering with and creating a digital campfire, kind of like the key principles and tactics to actually do it. And then we're going to talk about some best practices from brand-led campfires. So as you can see, the focus today really is around brands. We could have different sessions all about platforms and different things, but today the focus is brands, and I'm really going to laser focus on that. So first, a quick setup. What the heck is a digital campfire, and why do digital campfires matter? So quick bit of background. I first introduced this concept of digital campfires in February of 2020, which I said here on the slide that it seems like 100 internet years ago, but I actually am going to revise that to like 7,000 because it really does feel like such a long time ago. And in this piece, I identified this phenomena of younger audiences moving away from public-facing social platforms and flocking to more intimate, often more private, often more interactive online destinations. And I call these destinations digital campfires. And I invented this term to really just identify something that I'd been seeing in the zeitgeist for quite some time. The numbers at that time showed that among millennial and Gen Z audiences, the amount of time spent on social and then social media use overall was either flat, declining, or not rising as quickly as it had in years past. The exception was Instagram, which showed an upward usage trend in those two age groups. And I do want to note that these findings did not include TikTok because at the time, I really considered TikTok to be more of an entertainment platform. As we all know, it's not connected to your social graph. It's more like a Netflix, but I've since revised that, and we'll get into why. I think it's important to look at TikTok, obviously, when you're talking to younger audiences, especially. So the way that I want to kind of help people understand digital campfires is by breaking them out into 3 different types. So the 3 different types are as follows. The first is private messaging campfires. And just take note that all of these types are really kind of oriented around the primary reason that people gather there. So private messaging campfires, and you'll see examples next to each to give you a sense of what I mean. So that's where private or small group messaging, usually but not always with one's real life friends, is the primary purpose for gathering. So the examples, as you can see, Facebook Messenger might be one, WhatsApp, the text platform Community, which enables celebrities to text their fans. Barack Obama just got on that. I put Snapchat on here because it really is primarily a messaging platform now. Then you go down to micro community campfires. So there's a ton in here. The way I describe that is private or small group communication, usually, but not always with one's real life friends, is the primary purpose for gathering. So that can include platforms like, tons of platforms where subcultures thrive. So I think of that as like Discord, Slack groups, Pinterest. I'll put YouTube in there. The close friends feature within Instagram stories, that's even one. And I do put TikTok in here because it is such a wide open plane of incredibly deep subcultures, and I don't want to leave them out. So I think of them, as a platform. Perhaps they're not a digital campfire, but this sort of platform itself contains so many that I do want to classify it there. And then the last type of digital campfire, a shared experience campfire. So that's the private or public forums where participating in a shared experience, often around a shared interest, with a like-minded community is the primary purpose for gathering. So the examples there are almost all from gaming. So things like Fortnite, Twitch, Roblox, Animal Crossing, New Horizons, that kind of thing. So why are audiences flocking to digital campfires? Like, why is this happening? Well, there's a ton of reasons. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these. You've probably seen them in your audiences. There's actually a great report that just came out from an agency, I believe, called Co-Matter, and it's titled Post-Social Media. You may have seen that. It really dives into this behavioral shift in more detail. But, I did go into it in my piece. I wrote about this, these reasons. Why are they flocking to digital campfires? Well, they can be themselves. People don't have to have carefully curated online identities. And as we know, there's been a move for quite some time towards being more authentic, being more yourself online. So this just accelerates that. There's this desire to make real friends based on shared interests versus quote unquote friends. Go figure, that's finally happening. There's this desire for more privacy. I will say that I think there's some nuance in the term privacy that I think perhaps we can talk about during the Q&A, because a lot of these digital campfires contain thousands and thousands of people. You can't possibly know all of these people. So, when we see very intensely personal, private information being shared in these campfires, which happens all the time, it's more like the illusion of privacy, right? Like when I go to a Facebook group and I see people sharing stuff about their, very personal affairs, that is more of an illusion of privacy, I would say. I think there's some interesting nuance there, but I think that's one major factor for sure. And then sort of a respite from the crowds on social media, almost like, I described it as the difference between like a crowded airport terminal that you don't want to be in and kind of a more intimate campfire. And then people are craving more bespoke experiences. I mean, again, there's a larger trend out there we're seeing towards people having things totally catered around their interests, whether it's products or experiences. This is just an extension of that. So I want to acknowledge that a lot has changed since I wrote the piece, and I want to sort of walk you through what's changed and what's the same. So first off, I think it's really, really important to say that social media use overall is way, way up, okay? So that's including all across the major social platforms. And I didn't even bother to include specific stats here. I just put it up into the right arrow because honestly, we've seen a crazy growth curve. And so since February, when I wrote the piece to now, we've seen that across social. So it's not, I wouldn't say the same thesis applies that people are leaving social. Like there's still very much, and we've seen this rise because of COVID. So it's important to note that. I think we should. So the question is, are digital campfires still a thing? And the answer is yes. Digital campfires have exploded. And I think there's a few reasons for that as well. The first is they're kind of more essential than ever, right? They went from a kind of a nice to have, something that was like a maybe or a maybe thing I'll have maybe, to like a must have. And I think part of that is because we need digital community now more than ever, which kind of goes without saying. Digital campfires are kind of keeping us sane and connected and entertained, and they're serving a lot of the different purposes. If you're a mom or dad right now, chances are you're in a local mom or dad Facebook group talking about how hard it is to get through this time. And so your digital campfire goes from a nice to have to a lifeline. Gaming is also on fire. We've seen the rise of, I mentioned Roblox before. That's the #1 gaming site for teens. Since lockdown in March, the users have increased about 40%. So we've seen rises all across the board. So how can brands jump on this sea change in audience behavior? And more importantly, what's in it for brands that get involved? Because I like to ask, why bother? Like, why do this? So to the first question, I just want to note that for this presentation, I've really focused on consumer-facing brands leveraging digital campfire tactics, or consumer-facing brands building their own digital campfires versus actual digital campfire platforms like Discord or Spotify or Slack. But note that a lot can be learned by studying these platforms. It's just something that I chose to focus on because we just only have so much time, but I think you should know that. And as I said, what's in it for brands to get involved? Why bother? So this slide is very dense. Don't be put off by it. Basically, what I wanted to lay out here is how I think about this, answering the question, what's in it for brands? So at the top of this presentation, I said, think relationships. This is all about relationships. So this whole exercise is about building stronger relationships with your customer. So, I really want to set up this slide to emphasize that. And, when we think about building a relationship is about emotion, not transaction, at least not right away. It's about what's the emotional arc, what's the emotional pull for a consumer. So on the top over here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but at the very top, you have what's in it for brands. And those are the nuts and bolts metrics and goals that we're all familiar with. Things like, customer listening and developing an owned channel and scale and, things that we all want, things that go back and forth in decks and internal memos and things that are goals for brands. And I guess my question is, how do you connect each one of those to what your customers actually want so that you can build in this feedback loop of you're actually serving them what they want? And my argument here is that digital campfires actually achieve a lot of these goals and fulfill that emotional thing for customers. So how do you kind of connect each of the things you want, is the question that I was asked, to what your audience wants, needs, and feels. So for each of the what's in it for brands, I connected it to what's in it for customers. So let's give an example. You want to do some customer listening. So a digital campfire helps you develop an immediate channel for customer listening and feedback. Why is this something the customer would actually want? Well, they feel listened to and seen, and you can't really underestimate that. I'll give you another example. You want to develop or solidify an owned channel. Maybe your entire business is built on social, and you don't actually own those customers. Well, a digital campfire could help you develop an audience you own. And why is that important for your customers? Again, safe environment. They can be themselves there, different than social, which is a kind of a wide open plane. So those are just two examples, and you guys can screenshot that and use it, and I can answer more questions about that in the Q&A. But I think that's a really important kind of essential way to think about why bother and the question of why bother. So how do you create a digital campfire, and how do you dip a toe by partnering with an existing campfire? So let's talk about frameworks. Okay, so this is when I'm thinking about building or partnering for any of my clients or anyone I'm working with, this is kind of a first step. You kind of have to figure out who your digital campfire is for. And this is a framework I like to use. It's not mine. I didn't invent it. It's something that I first heard when speaking with different clients. I actually think I first heard it with Glossier and their community, but don't quote me on that. So basically, there's two sides of this. There's the capital C community on the left, as you see. And what I'm talking about there, those are your MVPs. Those are the people who evangelize your product, who share your content, who buy from you over and over again, who obsess over you. This can take different forms depending on what you offer. That group on the left is small, but mighty, really mighty. If you don't have a company yet, because some of you haven't even started, think of this as a group. A group is your smallest viable audience, as Seth Godin defines it. That's your digital campfire. That's what your digital campfire is for. It's not for everybody, and I think it's important to say that when you're building, it's really for your obsessives. Then you have your lowercase c community, and I'll talk in a second about how those two connect. Your lowercase c community is on the right, and that's anyone who's ever engaged with your brand. That could be, maybe they liked an Instagram post, maybe they read your latest email, maybe they bought from you once. Those aren't your true believers, but they're aware you exist and they're primed for more. that group is obviously much, much bigger, but they're less influential. So what your job is to ask what goodies, so that could be content, products, experiences, special access that you can offer your capital C community to nurture it so that it really nurtures and grows your lowercase c community in turn. So what I'm saying is that there's this symbiotic relationship between the two. It's not like they exist in a vacuum. But really the big takeaway here is that you're not trying to reach everyone with your Campfire, just a core group of people, but remember that one feeds the other. And I'll take questions about all that at the end, so don't worry if I'm moving quickly. Okay, so now I want to move into how to actually apply this. So first, a little quick bit of background, which was talked about at the top of the introduction. So in mid-April, I launched a series called the Digital Campfire Download, and it was based on the HBR piece. I wanted to get to know the creatives and the entrepreneurs behind some of these really fast-growing digital campfires. I've interviewed guests like Food52 co-founder Amanda Hesser, Layla Amjani, who runs shopping product for Instagram, Dan Altman, who is the president of a streetwear brand that I love called Chinatown Market, Aaron Levant, who is the CEO of a live shopping app called Network, Raina Pomeroy, who's speaking here at CMX, who runs a community for modern fertility, and a ton more. People from Substack and Ethel's Club. And really, I kept hearing the same insights over and over again from these people who are actually doing it. And so I've distilled really the top tactics that I heard about building a digital campfire or partnering with an existing one to this list. So the TLDR here is these tactics are gleaned from the brands and platforms that are actually building digital campfires successfully right now. So now we can jump into actually what's on this slide. So partnering within existing campfires, where I'm going to start, and then I'm going to jump to actually, creating your own. So on the slide previous, we talked about this capital C, lowercase c framework. And now that you've figured out and done that exercise and figured out who your campfire is for, part of knowing who you're for is understanding where they hang out, right? So it's time to ask, what platforms, could be digital campfire platforms or otherwise, does your audience primarily hang out on, and why? So identify a campfire, pick one. I'm going to go walk you through partnering with existing campfires, as I said. Then I'm going to give you a couple examples of brands that have done it well. So let's jump into partnering. So this is for a brand that maybe doesn't have the resources to build its own campfire, but wants to dip a toe. So first up, you'll see study the campfire. So what do I mean by that? I guess what I'm talking about is really what's the language of that campfire? How do people speak and interact there? What are its rules and parameters? The way you can do this is by hanging out there. And I can't emphasize that enough. A lot of people think there are shortcuts to this. You either need to go hang out on the campfire, spend time on Discord or on Fortnite or whatever it is you're thinking of partnering, and you need to do that, or you need to hire someone really good who gets the platform and who can tell you how to behave on it. Because if you don't, you're just going to come off as ham-fisted and it's just not going to work. So you really need to understand the rules, and studying it is really one way to do that. Next up, think value. And when I say value, I'm talking about the value for the audience. So what is the tangible benefit you can bring to your audience by showing up at that campfire? Whether it's, giving them things that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten, or delivering some really cool piece of content, or something that is going to surprise and delight them. The next step is customize. Think about the products and the messaging that you'll use to engage them, and reflect really their needs and the rules of the campfire. And I want to say here that you got to resist a one-size-fits-all approach. Just like it took marketers a while to learn that you can't just apply the same content to Instagram and Facebook and all of your channels and just repurpose it. They're all different channels. A digital campfire is the same. You have to think about what are the rules of that campfire, just like social, and think about how am I going to show up there. And so resisting that one-size-fits-all is really, really important. And then, of course, be consistent. I mean, that's with anything, right? So if you plan to develop a long-term relationship with your audience, which I think that people are interested in doing, think long-term about how you're showing up in a given campfire, even if it's a partnership. So I want to give some examples of brands partnering that I think are helpful and just very clear. So the first is a bunch from Fortnite. And I use Fortnite just because that's such a clear example. Marvel, Nike, the NFL, they leverage Fortnite to reach their audiences by selling skins. And if you're not familiar with skins and what they are, there's essentially stylized weapons and outfits for players' in-game avatars. They created mashup, kind of branded mashup game modules and game modes, and they did limited edition product drops inside the game. Another great example I like to talk about is Sprite, which spearheaded a campaign, creative partnership with Reddit. And that was in the Latin American market. It was last year. It was called You Are Not Alone. And the company used data from Google to determine kind of personal pain points that young people were searching. Then it set up Reddit forums, each helmed by a different influencer who had personal experience with issues such as like feeling like you're in the wrong body. The outcome was really, really poignant personal discussions about loneliness, all led by Sprite. And the last one I just want to bring up that's not on here, but it's come up so much during this quarantine COVID time, is Animal Crossing New Horizons. There's been fashion brands like Valentino and Marc Jacobs who have gone in there and designed entire fashion collections for that platform that people can use for their characters. Okay, let's jump to building a new campfire. So you're a brand that's ready to do more than just dip a toe, great. You're ready to dive in and create your own campfire. So I'm going to walk you through, there's 3 slides, they're jam-packed, but I'll walk you through that outline now. So the first, and I can't emphasize this enough, it's like what I've been saying this whole time, think relationships before commerce. So creating a digital campfire is all about developing a deeper relationship. As I mentioned, commerce will happen, but ideally not right away. I will say the caveat to that is unless you're building an entire platform that revolves around commerce. So the example there might be StockX, where you're doing sneaker drops. I mean, I'm not saying wait to drop, but you do have to think about who are your people and are you going to start selling to them right away? Probably not, unless you're an app or a platform like that. Then study your audience. In the same way that you studied the campfire with partnering in the previous slides, here you're going to study your audience and you're going to learn how do they speak and interact, which campfire platforms do they hang out on and why, how will yours replicate this and or be different enough to make them come and to stay. And then test the waters, determine whether there's a group of people out there who genuinely need your campfire. Are you building for them? And you do that ideally before you launch. Often it's a group who are already active elsewhere. Okay, then pick your platform. This is important. Decide whether you're building a campfire on an existing platform. That could be, for example, Facebook groups or Slack, or creating your own. Try to build where your audience already is hanging out and choose a platform based on how you want your members to use it. Then focus on one and really commit. I'm bringing up the value thing again here because it's so important. Think value for the audience. Just like with partnering, determine that tangible benefit you're offering by building the campfire. Helping your audience connect with each other might be one of the benefits, right? Like you want to bring people together around a certain topic or issue. Awesome. That could be enough. And then create a low barrier to entry. I love this one. Campfires are not for your whole audience, as we've talked about, just for your core. So creating a small barrier to entry to help ensure that only the people who really want to be there are there is a good idea. I've actually seen one of my favorite examples of this is from a podcast called Forever 35. Forever 35 is a wildly popular podcast about self-care and started out being about skincare. It's hosted by 2 amazing women. And they have a Facebook group. In addition to a ton of organic Facebook groups they have nothing to do with, they started a Facebook group for fans. And they have people who want to get into the group actually have to give a secret password, quote unquote, to get into the group that they say every episode of the podcast and put in the show notes. The secret password is serums, okay? But if you don't listen to the podcast, you wouldn't know that. And so it's a very small barrier to entry. It's super simple, but it keeps people who actually don't listen to the podcast out, which is actually very helpful because they don't want them in there. And then the last slide, 4 key principles for brands: set up strong leadership. Clear rules, clear guidelines, and moderation are really key to building trust and really making people feel safe. Establishing healthy boundaries for your community early. This is especially important if you're asking your community to make themselves vulnerable. I'm sure you've run into this. We've seen a real lack of this to be the downfall of many, many campfires. I mean, I actually see this problem plaguing the audio conversations app Clubhouse right now. You've probably seen in the press, there's a ton of stuff about their lack of moderation. And I'm on that app. I don't go on there. I don't want to be, I don't want to be subjected to those conversations. It's not an attractive place for me. And I know that there's a lot of other people who feel the same. And so you're losing people with that. Use content and content curation to stoke the flames of your campfire. What does that mean? So think about using programming content as you would any other editorial channel, right? This might be a mix of live conversations, shared articles, special guests, and really prioritize that content that sparks interaction between community members. Treat your super fans like the special people they are. And what do I mean by that? So handing out perks and virtual badges and credits for your MVPs. But I will say don't overthink it, because a little goes a long way. And when I say that, I guess what I mean is I think of an example like with the company Network, and it's a drops-focused shopping app. I think I mentioned I'd interviewed the CEO. And at the very beginning when they were getting started, he wrote thank you notes to all of his key customers. And it was a very simple gesture, but one that went a long way. And those people are still with him today. So I'm coming up on the end, but I want to have a couple minutes to get to some of my favorite brand-led campfires. So what are those? I put a bunch on this slide, but I want to talk about three. The first is Peloton, the second is Modern Fertility, and the third is a company I love. It's a card game called We're Not Really Strangers. So what exactly are they doing? What are they doing that makes them campfires and makes them successful? So Peloton, if you're familiar, they have a great Facebook group. And this Facebook group now has, I think it's got about 340K members. And they're talking about a lot more than just their Pelotons. Yes, they're talking about exercise. Yes, they're talking about the Peloton clothing and the lines and the instructors, but they're also talking about deeply personal stuff. And there's also a ton of groups that have nothing to do with Peloton, meaning they're not run by Peloton, but they are on Facebook. They're fan-led groups, let's call them. And I'm in one called the Peloton Moms group, for example. And let me tell you, there's a lot of deeply intimate stuff happening in that group that I would encourage you to check out. Anyone's welcome to do that. Anyone's welcome to go into that group. But it's really fascinating because they're all gathering around their interest and their love of a brand, but they're certainly talking about much more. And so talk about a relationship builder. Then you have Modern Fertility, and I know Raina, their head of community at Modern Fertility, is talking here at CMX, which is great. She's incredible. So Modern Fertility has started a Slack channel. Now, something that has really struck me with them is they're for so many more people than just their customers. Modern Fertility Slack channel really serves as a hub of information, support, education, because there's really a dearth of information about sort of anything related to hormones or sort of education about fertility online that's super reliable. Of course it exists, but it is hard to find really reliable, helpful information. So Modern Fertility, in addition to serving their customers, is actually creating a hub of that information in the form of this Slack channel, which has become incredible. They also have a really cool community advisory board, which is 10 women at different stages of their fertility journey, rotating in and out every 6 months and helping the company understand where to go. So I would say that's kind of a tangential part of their digital campfire. And then lastly, We're Not Really Strangers, which is the viral card game I mentioned. I could do a whole presentation on just them. They're such an interesting company. They essentially launched on Instagram, developed some incredibly interesting guerrilla marketing tactics, but the digital campfire component of what they're doing is really visible in their text community. And that is something that they run off Community, the platform. They have about 150K people on that text community. And the game is really about encouraging deeper connections between people, getting vulnerable. And so you can imagine that text thread gets really, really vulnerable as well. So lastly, measuring success. I could do a whole presentation on how to think about measuring the impact and ROI of growing and tending to digital campfires. I know digital campfires drive business outcomes because I've seen it. The next step that I think all of us are tasked with doing is proving exactly how they do this and are more than just marketing initiatives, although there's nothing wrong with a great marketing initiative. That said, it's really hard to put a specific ROI on community building. If anyone at this conference has figured it out, let me know. I would love to know, please. I know there are metrics out there, but to my knowledge, none of them feel like they're reliable. It's not as simple as measure this metric or that metric. That's partly because it crosses over into so many different parts of the business, whether it's social, sales, customer acquisition, LTV, it's all of those things. So there are obviously engagement metrics we can track, things like social media impressions, hashtags, video views, conversions. Those are the things we always track, right? But that's often empty. And I think we know that. And so the most important metrics I like to track to sort of track success of my digital campfire where I'm working with someone is really about growth, retention, and connection between members, and then connection to your brand purpose. And so those are how I think about it, but I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to showing this. So that wraps today. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to take questions. I'm going to stop sharing now. And welcome everybody back. So I think that I can take questions unless, do we have, yes, Valentina.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, I'll help you do some questions. So we have the Q&A feature. If you have a question, please drop it there. And remember, you can upvote questions. So you can let me know that you want this question answered. So let's get right to it. Tony says, what are the best platforms for digital campfires? I think Zoom would be good.
Okay, so it's a really tough question because there's new platforms coming out every single day. And I see these lists, different platforms, and there are like hundreds of different platforms, if not more. I think you really have to think about where your audience already is. So it's not about what's the best versus the worst. It's sort of like, are you building a community that's largely focused on business? And are people already on Slack? Great, start it on Slack. Are you looking to get a more bespoke experience where you're looking to do memberships and something more complicated? You might want to think about building on like a white label platform like a Mighty Networks or something like that. So it totally depends on who your audience is, how much of a lift you want this to be, and kind of where they already are. So there's no one size fits all answer, unfortunately. I wish there were. And honestly, there's new ones coming out every single day. It's one of the toughest questions that I get.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right. Tina says, how do you attract eyeballs when there are so many communities/groups that folks can join?
Mm-hmm. It, again, depends on who you are, but I think let's take an example of I'm going to say the Forever 35 podcast is an interesting example because they're a podcast. And of course, everyone and their mom is like launching a podcast now. So, and we know that podcasts alone don't get eyeballs. Like you have to promote them and they have to have really robust channels to do that. So having, building a digital campfire around your podcast is actually a really smart idea. How do they get eyeballs? You can promote the hell out of it on other platforms. Word of mouth is huge. You want to be going to other community type platforms where your people will be hanging out. So for example, in building my digital campfire download, I spend a lot of time on Indie Hackers, which is, another great community in their forums, because there's a ton of people there who already are interested in the subject of community building. And so just figuring out what is the interest of your people and then delivering value in that campfire, and you'll be able to draw them in that way. Of course, if you're delivering value to 3 people and they don't tell their friends, you're not going to be able to, spread the word. But figuring out where do these people hang out and going out and getting them and doing thinking about special content and promotion to speak to them. But also know that this isn't like a quick growth thing. This is like a slow and steady wins the race. It can be, but it also is like it's over time. You're building a long-term relationship. It's not going to be overnight.
Yeah, I remember David Spink saying at the beginning of last year's summit that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that just applies to so many things in community. Absolutely. I know for me, I created a podcast during lockdown. Let us know in the chat if you also created a podcast. I feel like it's like the thing to do in 2020.
100%. And like I love a good podcast, but a stat I heard, which was bananas, was that like 99% of podcasts get 100 list downloads a month, and the rest are like where all of the interest is. So it's like, yeah, you putting it on a platform is nothing. That's just your distribution mechanism. You have to promote it and build a following and all of that. So how do you do that? Apple is certainly not helping you with that. So how are you going to get off there and do something else?
Yeah, you have to put in the work.
Yeah.
All right, next question then is from Annika, who's actually in our previous session. A lot of online communities fail because they don't attract members. In your experience, what are the most common reasons that brand communities fail to achieve traction?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. First off, I think there's not enough programming in the Campfire that's tailored and targeted to the people there. So if you're a brand and you're just constantly, let's say, posting, like buy this, or put like, what do you think of this shirt, or what do you think of this shirt? And let's say you're a clothing brand. Perhaps they want a little bit broader content about style overall. I'm just making this up. Looking at how they're interacting on other platforms and the kinds of conversations they're having will help you shape your content for your own digital Campfire. So that, I would say, is one, is not providing relevant content or ways for your community to connect. Like, what are they actually getting? It goes back to that value question, right? Like, what is the value you're providing? People have so many options. They're so crazy. Lots of different things that are pulling people's attention today. So what is it that's going to provide that value, and really honing in on what is that nugget that you can provide that nobody else can, and then doubling down on that will really help get at the heart of that. And that, honestly, for a lot of brands might require a brand exercise and going back to basics on who are they, what are they about, who are they for, all those questions. I have to say, when I get in the weeds and actually start building these digital Campfires with brands, it often has to take 3 steps back to a brand exercise where you go, oh gosh, we don't know like what we're about, what we stand for. What's the bigger idea? What's the emotional connection that we can really tap into? And then you'll start to deliver content. The other big thing is moderation. You really need somebody in there who gets how to moderate. There was a great example of a Facebook group, which now has, I think, over 1 million people in it, called Fin, F-I-N. And it started out, it was really originally for women in Nigeria, sharing their personal experiences. And the way the founder started it is she took quotes from around the internet that she found on Twitter about the experience of being a woman in Nigeria and like put them on little, posts, and then encourage people to post. And so that kind of created a feedback loop. You can read about it on my site. I go into detail on how she did this on digitalcampfires.co. But it was pretty incredible. So talk about really smart content that's programmed for the people in there that also encourages a feedback loop of discussion, but she also moderates the heck out of it. So she has moderators all over the world who are volunteer who do this. So I would say, thinking about what are the parameters. If you're trying to get people to be vulnerable, be honest, be open, you can't expect them to do that without parameters and boundaries.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's where your guidelines come in, and you need to make sure you're enforcing those guidelines. Yes. Because if you're not, then the people that aren't following will get fed up, and then people that aren't following will just keep doing what they know they shouldn't do, or maybe they don't know. It's really important. All right. Got time for 2 more questions. Tony says, what do you mean by partnering? Yeah, so I kind of broke out the potential sort of way that you can have a digital Campfire, because people are like, okay, great, I want to build a digital Campfire, I'm ready. It's like, well, maybe you're not ready because you don't have the resources, or you just want to dip your toe. So when I say partnering, those examples that I gave about, Nike and Fortnite, for example, are a great example, or Marvel, or the NFL. Those are great examples of partnering, brands going like, yeah, we're not building our own digital Campfire. We're going into an existing digital Campfire, in that case, Fortnite, to actually just partner and figure out how we can reach the people we want to reach inside the digital Campfire in a way that's super authentic to that Campfire and will resonate with them. So that's what I wanted. That's what I mean by partnering, that it's kind of a first step when you're not ready. Like, building one of these is hard. There's a lot involved. You have to actually tend to it. It takes a lot of work. Ask anyone who runs one. It's not something that you can just do in your spare time. So I wanted to give kind of a first step, a dipping of the toe. That's what I mean. All right. And last question by Simone or Simone. I'm not sure if either of those are the right way to say your name, but how do you maintain or grow your existing digital Campfire, especially for younger demographics, i.e. Gen Z? How do you maintain or grow? Well, I do think it really depends on what we're talking about here. So for example, if you are a platform like Roblox, that's going to be a very different answer than if you're, let's say, a text community like We're Not Really Strangers, which is very, very much for Gen Z. Both of those examples, by the way, are very much for younger
demographics. So, you know, I don't know quite how to answer that exactly, because it's going to differ based on, right? Like Roblox has new games that it rolls out all the time. I mean, obviously you go into these different worlds, there's a ton happening. We're not really strangers. The example I used is like constantly communicating with its fans in ways that are deeply vulnerable. I know the founder is somebody who doesn't plan much, and she kind of shoots from the hip and texts kind of whatever she's feeling on that day, and that authenticity really connects with her text community. So I think it really depends on what it is and who it's for. But I think those same principles that I laid out really apply across all of them, right? Like it could be, it's just figure out the value, figure out from there, figure out the content, know who you're for. All those things that I sketched out, you know, really apply. We can go deeper into kind of specific content that will engage. I think that's honestly a separate conversation, but it's a really important one.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we have come to the end of time, so I want to give you your deserved clap. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. Lovely to see all of you, your names. Thanks for coming.
All right, I'm going to be back very shortly with our next speaker. Don't forget to check the agenda to see where you would like to go next. I will see you in a few seconds.
Awesome. Thank you, Valentina. I appreciate it.